She sat there, eyes fixed on the test results in her hands, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in a haze of disbelief. The papers trembled slightly, as if her own hands were unwilling to accept what they were reading. 6 weeks pregnant. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, but the reality of it was still sinking in, like a wave crashing into a quiet shore, shaking everything in its path. This couldn't be real. This wasn't supposed to happen to her. She had been so careful, so cautious. The pills, her trusted safeguard, had failed her. She felt like a fool. Rachel was a 22-year-old university student, with the world in front of her, ambitious, independent, full of dreams. She had plans, big plans that didn't include children, at least not anytime soon. She was still figuring out life, still shaping herself, but now everything was different. Now, she was holding a medical result that was threatening to destroy the very future she had built for herself. As she left the clinic, the paper crumpled in her hand, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Anthony, her boyfriend, the man she had shared countless moments with. She needed him now more than ever. She needed his reassurance, his love, his support. She texted him, her fingers shaking, barely able to type, "We need to talk." She hit send and waited for what seemed like an eternity, but nothing came. No reply, not even a word, just silence. Panic began to claw at her chest. Was something wrong? Was he angry, confused? Or worse, was he gone? They had been so close, shared so many dreams and promises. They spoke to each other every day, exchanged love and laughter despite their hectic college schedules. He was supposed to be her rock, the one who would stand by her through thick and thin. But now, there was nothing. Rachel called him, again and again. Each time, the phone rang endlessly, unanswered. A cold chill settled in her stomach deep down. She feared what the silence meant. Anthony, the man she thought was her everything, the one who had promised her forever, had just vanished. The call she had been dreading finally came through. But it wasn't the warm, loving voice she had hoped for. It was detached, harsh, as if he was speaking to a stranger, not the woman he had once called his own. "Hello," his voice cracked through the line, confusion lingering in his tone. "Who is this?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. He didn't even recognize her number. He didn't even care to. Her world began to crumble as she tried to hold herself together. She had just told him something that would change both their lives forever. She had expected a different reaction, comfort, maybe even panic, but togetherness. What she got, however, was indifference. "Anthony, it's Rachel, please, we need to talk." "I'm pregnant," she said, barely managing to speak through the lump in her throat. There was a long silence on the other end, a silence that stretched for what felt like hours. Then came the words that shattered her. "I don't want this. I don't want any of this. It's over, Rachel. Don't ever call me again." The words stung, each one cutting deeper than the last. Over. How could this be over? Hadn't they talked about their future together? The plans they made, the life they would build? Yet, here he was, telling her it was done. It was as if everything they had shared meant nothing at all. She stood there, stunned, unable to process the crushing weight of what was happening. She had expected a fight, a resolution, maybe even an apology. But this wasn't a relationship anymore. This was abandonment. She had just been discarded. Not even a second thought. Rachel's knees buckled beneath her, and she crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking. She had no one. Not even Anthony, the one person she thought she could count on, had stood by her. Rachel was alone. And the reality of her situation, the pregnancy, the uncertainty, the isolation began to overwhelm her. What was she going to do now? Her world had just been ripped apart. The life she had been so sure of had shattered in an instant, and there she was, left holding the pieces. But even in the depth of her despair, Rachel knew one thing: this wasn't the end. Somehow, she had to keep going. She had no choice. Her life, her future, the life growing inside her, they depended on her strength. But where could she find that strength when she felt so weak? If you're watching this, maybe you've been through something similar. A sudden change, a betrayal that you never saw coming. A moment that leaves you wondering if there's any hope left. But let me tell you this: there is always hope. Even in the darkest of times, you can find your way out. Before we dive deeper into Rachel's story and her journey of resilience, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring more stories, lessons, and insights into the struggles we all face in life. You won't want to miss the twists and turns ahead in Rachel's journey, so stay with us, and let's discover what happens next. Question for reflection. After hearing Rachel's story, think about this. Do you believe that people who leave us during tough times are truly worth holding on to? A yes, people should be given second chances, no matter the circumstances. B no, when someone leaves during a critical moment, they've shown who they really are. Comment your answer below or B, and let's discuss what you think about second chances in relationships. The moment Rachel saw the text message from Anthony, she felt a strange combination of hope and dread. It wasn't just a simple "Hey, how are you?" No, it was something more. Her heart raced as she tried to compose herself. She typed the words carefully, "We need to talk," with her finger hovering over the send button. She hesitated. How could she even put this into words? She was terrified of the conversation, terrified of what his response might be. She hit send, and immediately, she began to second-guess herself. It wasn't just the pregnancy that rattled her. It was the aftermath, the looming unknown. When she first started dating Anthony, she was taken by his charm, his thoughtfulness, and his ability to make her feel like she was the center of his world. Their relationship was one built on deep emotional connection, mutual respect, and constant communication. They had been inseparable, texting each other through the day, calling each other multiple times a day, making plans for a future that seemed so certain. Rachel had always felt safe with him. He was supposed to be the person she could rely on, the one who would stand by her no matter what. But now, everything had changed. She had told him about the pregnancy, something that should have been a shared moment, a turning point in their relationship, a chance to be parents together. But instead of the love and support she desperately needed, she was met with silence. She tried calling him again and again. The phone rang, but Anthony didn't pick up. Every unanswered call felt like a blow to her chest, her breath becoming more erratic with each passing minute. The weight of the uncertainty hung heavy on her shoulders. What was going on? Why wasn't he answering? Had something happened to him, or worse, was he avoiding her on purpose? The more she thought about it, the more she feared the latter. It was clear that the man she had loved, the man she thought she knew, was slipping away from her, and she couldn't stop it. Then the phone rang. It was him, Anthony, but the voice that greeted her wasn't the one she had known for so long. There was no warmth in his tone, no care. It was flat, distant. "Hello," he said, sounding unsure, as if he didn't even recognize her number. Rachel's heart dropped to her stomach. It felt like a cold punch to her chest, leaving her breathless. "Anthony," she started, her voice trembling, trying to hold on to her composure. "It's Rachel, please. We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then, finally, a sigh, a harsh, almost exhausted sound. "What is it, Rachel?" he asked, his voice sharp. The words stung like venom, seeping into the cracks of her heart. This wasn't the Anthony she had known. This was someone else, someone unrecognizable. And then it came, the words she had never imagined she would hear from him. "I don't want this. I don't want any of it. It's over." The weight of those words hit Rachel like a freight train. Over, just like that. Had their relationship meant so little to him that he could throw it all away so easily? She stood frozen, unable to comprehend the gravity of what was happening. The man she had believed in, the person who was supposed to be by her side, was now telling her it was over, just like that. Her hands were shaking, the phone slipping from her grip as she tried to process his words. "What do you mean, it's over?" she asked, her voice breaking. How could it be over? They had built something together, shared so much, trusted each other. This wasn't supposed to happen, but there it was, the painful truth she didn't want to face. "It's over, Rachel. I don't want a baby. I didn't sign up for this." His voice was harsh, dismissive. Rachel felt a surge of anger and betrayal rise within her. The baby they were going to have, the life they could have built together, none of it seemed to matter to him. His words cut deeper than anything she had ever imagined. How could he be so cold? How could someone she had shared her life with, someone she had trusted, turn so heartless? For a moment, Rachel was silent. She didn't know how to respond. The truth was, she didn't even recognize the man on the other end of the line anymore. The Anthony she had loved would have never spoken to her like this, would have never abandoned her at such a crucial moment in her life. But now, he was someone else, someone who couldn't care less about the future they had talked about the life growing inside her. It was all meaningless to him. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't let him see her break down, not like this. Not when she was already drowning in the confusion and pain of his words. But Anthony, she pleaded, I'm pregnant. We're going to be parents, don't you care? I don't care, he spat. I didn't sign up for this. I'm in my final year, Rachel. This is supposed to be the most important time of my life. I don't need this, I don't need you. Each word felt like a slap in the face, like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. His complete lack of empathy, his refusal to take responsibility, it shattered everything she had believed about their relationship. The silence between them felt suffocating, a chasm growing between them that no words could bridge. Rachel felt the raw sting of rejection, the excruciating pain of being abandoned at the moment when she needed him the most. I don't want this to be over, she whispered. We can figure this out together. But his response was cold, final. No, Rachel, it's over. Don't call me again. This is it. And with that, the line went dead. Rachel stood there, numb, her hands still gripping the phone as though she could somehow hold on to what was left of their relationship. But there was nothing left. The person she had trusted, the man she had loved, had just left her. And in that moment, she realized something that was harder to accept than anything else. He never truly loved her the way she had loved him. She stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts spiraling in every direction. She had always imagined their future together, building a life, supporting each other, facing challenges hand in hand. But now, it was just her, alone, and the reality of her situation settled in like a heavy weight. She was pregnant, she was alone, and she had no idea how to move forward. In that moment, Rachel realized that no matter how deep the hurt, life would go on. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was stronger than she thought. She had no choice but to find the strength within herself to face whatever came next. And though she had been abandoned by the one person she thought she could count on, Rachel would learn to navigate this new chapter in her life, one step at a time. What did she have left? Only herself, only her future. And the life growing inside her? She didn't know where she would go from here, but one thing was certain, she would not give up, not now, not ever. The silence in Rachel's dorm room was deafening. It was as though the world had come to a standstill, and all she could hear was the chaotic symphony of her own thoughts. She sat at the edge of her bed, her phone still clutched tightly in her hands, as if hoping for some miraculous message from Anthony. But there was nothing, no text, no call, just emptiness. A hollow feeling that had seeped into every part of her being. She had expected panic, maybe even anger. But what she felt now wasn't either of those, it was confusion. Confusion about what had happened to the man she had once thought she would spend her life with. The love of her life had vanished, just like that. She couldn't understand it. How could he turn his back on her, on their future, on their baby? She had imagined a different scenario where they would face this together, hand in hand, sharing the responsibility, the joy, the challenges. But now she was alone. Rachel had never thought she'd be in this position. At 22, she had planned for so much more. She had planned for school, for a career, for travel. She had imagined a life that was about discovery, growth, and adventure. But now she was looking at a future she hadn't prepared for, a future she never expected. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had worked for, her education, her dreams, the life she thought she would lead, was slipping away. She could almost feel it, slipping through her fingers like sand. She stood up, pacing the small room, trying to make sense of the situation. Her emotions were all over the place. One minute, she was filled with anger at Anthony. The next, she felt a crushing wave of sadness. The tears that had been held back now threatened to spill over. How could he do this to her? How could he abandon her at the most vulnerable point in her life? She had hoped, for even a moment, that maybe just maybe he would come back. That maybe he would come to her and tell her they could make it work. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how naive that hope was. Anthony had shown her his true self in that phone call. The man who once promised to love her forever had left her stranded, pregnant and scared, without a second thought. And now, she had to face the reality of what that meant. She had no idea how to navigate this on her own. Sure, she had friends, but how could she talk to them? How could she tell them that she was pregnant, alone, and heartbroken? The one person she thought she could rely on had disappeared, and now the weight of her situation felt impossibly heavy. She thought of her parents, but the truth was, she couldn't bear to tell them either. They had always been strict, protective, and conservative. They had made her promise that she wouldn't have a boyfriend until she was done with school, that she would focus on her studies and her future. How could she call them now and tell them she was pregnant? How could she face them knowing they would be disappointed, maybe even ashamed of her? The shame of it all felt suffocating. It wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about the judgment she was certain would follow. She could already hear the whispers in her head, the harsh comments from others who would look at her with pity, with judgment, and perhaps even with contempt. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being in control of her life, but now it felt like she had lost all control. She had been careful, she had taken the pill. But somehow, it hadn't been enough, and now she was here, facing a future she hadn't planned for and feeling like she was trapped in a life she never wanted. Her mind raced through all the possible outcomes. What would happen if she kept the baby? Could she finish school? Would she ever be able to have the life she had dreamed of, or would everything change forever? And if she chose to terminate the pregnancy, could she live with herself? Would she regret it? She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. She was consumed by fear, uncertainty, and the overwhelming weight of the decisions she now had to make. There was one thing Rachel was certain of, though. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't want to face this by herself. She needed someone to talk to, someone who would listen, someone who would offer support. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that no one could truly understand what she was going through. No one had been in her shoes. No one had felt the way she did. Her friends, even though they meant well, could never understand the depth of her emotions, the crushing fear that came with this pregnancy. They couldn't possibly know what it was like to be abandoned by the person you loved and trusted the most. Rachel sank down onto her bed, her mind still whirling with unanswered questions. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the panic that was rising in her chest. She knew she couldn't keep running from the reality of her situation. She couldn't keep avoiding it, pretending it wasn't happening. This was her life now. She had to figure it out. She had to find a way forward. The next few weeks were a blur of confusion and emotional chaos. Rachel tried to push through, tried to keep up with her studies, but it was nearly impossible. Her mind was constantly preoccupied with the pregnancy, with the fear of the future, with the pain of being abandoned. She couldn't focus on anything else. Every time she opened a textbook, every time she sat down to study, her mind would wander back to the reality of her situation. How was she going to do this? How could she possibly balance school, a baby, and everything else that was going on? Her body was changing too. The physical symptoms of pregnancy, the nausea, the exhaustion, made it even harder to concentrate. Some days, she could barely get out of bed. The weight of everything, both emotionally and physically, was beginning to take its toll. She couldn't escape it. It was always there, looming over her. One day, after hours of trying to study in the library, Rachel found herself in the bathroom, bent over the sink, vomiting into the toilet. She felt humiliated, but she couldn't stop it. The reality of her life was consuming her, and she was powerless to stop it. When she went back to her seat, her friends looked at her with concern. They knew something was wrong, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. She couldn't explain what she was going through, not when she didn't understand it herself. At that moment, Rachel realized just how alone she really was. She had tried to reach out to others, but it felt like no one could truly understand. No one could offer her the comfort she needed. She was facing this pregnancy alone, with no one to help guide her through it. No one to tell her it would be okay, no one to tell her what to do. She had to figure it out on her own. But as she sat there, on the edge of the bathroom sink, she realized something else. She couldn't do this alone, she couldn't face this by herself. And yet, in the midst of her fear and confusion, she also realized that she had no other choice. This was her reality now, and no matter how scared she was, no matter how lost she felt, she had to find the strength to face it. To face the future that had been thrust upon her, because there was no turning back now. For turning point, a new beginning and unexpected opportunity. Rachel's world had been reduced to a blur of overwhelming emotions, uncertainty, and the harsh sting of abandonment. After Anthony's brutal rejection, it felt like the universe had conspired against her, throwing every possible obstacle in her way. She was pregnant, alone, and uncertain about every step she had to take. The future, once so bright and full of possibilities, now seemed like an endless road of hardship, a journey she didn't know how to navigate. But somewhere, buried deep in her heart, Rachel knew that even in the darkest moments, there had to be a way out, a way forward. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel's life continued to spiral into chaos. Her academic performance suffered, her health took a toll, and the weight of carrying a baby on her own became almost unbearable. Each morning, she woke up with a pit in her stomach, not knowing what the day would bring, but dreading it nonetheless. Her body was changing, a constant reminder of what she couldn't control. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder that her life had shifted in ways she hadn't prepared for. Her friends, once the pillars of her support system, had started to distance themselves. Some had tried to be there for her, but the isolation was palpable. The whispers, the pitying glances, the judgments, she could feel them all around her, and they weighed heavily on her fragile heart. Rachel couldn't help but feel like an outcast, a girl who had been abandoned by the very people who were supposed to care. One day, as she was walking through the campus courtyard, still feeling the sting of loneliness, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Da, a woman she had met only a few weeks ago. They hadn't spent much time together, but Rachel had always admired her strength and the quiet sense of determination in Dee's eyes. She had been kind to Rachel when no one else had, offering support without expecting anything in return. "Hey, Rachel," Da called out with a warm smile, her presence a stark contrast to the coldness Rachel had felt from everyone else. "How are you holding up?" Rachel paused, the weight of the question sinking in. How was she holding up? She wasn't sure. The truth was, she felt like she was barely holding it together. But somehow, she managed to force a smile. "I'm getting by," Rachel said softly, her voice betraying the sadness she tried to conceal. Da studied her for a moment, her eyes softening with empathy. "You know, I've been thinking about you," she said, "and I want to help. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Rachel was taken aback by her sincerity. It had been a long time since anyone had offered help without expecting something in return. Without fully understanding why, Rachel found herself opening up to Da. She told her about the pregnancy, about Anthony, and how she felt so lost, so abandoned. She didn't expect her to understand, but Da just listened, offering no judgment, just a quiet, reassuring presence. "Rachel," Da said gently, after a long pause, "I know things are tough right now. But you've got something inside of you, a strength that you probably don't even realize you have. I can see it. You're going to make it through this. And I'll be here to help you however I can." In that moment, Rachel felt something shift inside her, a flicker of hope that had long been extinguished. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to face this by herself. Dee's words, her unwavering support, were like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite a small spark of determination in Rachel's chest. The days that followed were a slow but steady journey of rebuilding. Da helped Rachel in ways she never expected, whether it was providing emotional support, helping her figure out practical solutions, or even just sharing a meal and a quiet conversation. Slowly, Rachel began to see a future beyond the immediate pain, beyond the overwhelming weight of the pregnancy and the sense of abandonment. Then came the unexpected opportunity. One afternoon, While they were both working at a local restaurant where Dave had found part-time work as a dishwasher, Rachel overheard a conversation between two men in the kitchen. They were talking about a potential business partnership, a deal that could change the trajectory of their lives. The restaurant was small but well established, and the two men were discussing the possibility of expanding their operations. One of the men, the owner, had been impressed by Rachel's work ethic during her shifts and had mentioned her in passing to Dave. "You know," the owner said, looking over at Rachel, "she's been doing a great job here. Maybe we could use someone like her in a bigger capacity helping with the translations or even assisting with business negotiations. She seems smart and capable." Rachel's ears perked up at the mention of her name. She had always kept her head down, working hard but never expecting anything in return. But now, this potential opportunity seemed to be unfolding right in front of her. It wasn't much, but it was something, a way to step out of the fog of uncertainty and take control of her future again. Dave, noticing Rachel's interest, smiled knowingly. "You've got a gift for languages, Rachel. You speak fluent Chinese, right?" Rachel nodded, still processing the conversation. She had studied Chinese for years and had always dreamed of using her skills in a professional setting, but with everything that had happened, she had pushed those dreams aside. Now, it seemed like fate was handing her an opportunity she couldn't ignore. The next day, Rachel was asked to meet with the owner of the restaurant, a man named David Mona, to discuss the possibility of working with him on a business project involving international expansion. The conversation was casual, but Rachel could feel the weight of the moment. David seemed genuinely interested in her skills, and he mentioned that the restaurant chain was planning to work with several international clients, which would require the ability to speak multiple languages. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? By the end of the meeting, David had offered her a position as a translator and business assistant. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a job one that could help her build a future, one step at a time. The fact that he was willing to offer her a chance, despite her current situation, was a testament to the belief he had in her potential. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt a sense of purpose returning to her. She was no longer trapped in the overwhelming fear of what was to come. She had a chance to make something of herself again, to take control of her future and start building the life she had always dreamed of. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she now had a path forward. And as she walked out of the restaurant, feeling the weight of the decision settle within her, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline, a turning point that gave her the strength to believe in herself once more. Rachel knew that, no matter how difficult the journey had been, she now had the opportunity to create a future that was hers. It was a chance for a new beginning, one that she had never expected, but was ready to embrace. This wasn't just an opportunity to rebuild her life, it was a chance to prove to herself that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt ready to face it. The sun had barely begun to rise when Rachel stepped out of her apartment one crisp morning, the chill of the air biting at her skin. It was early, and the world outside seemed still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. She stood there for a moment, just breathing, taking in the quiet. Life had been anything but quiet for the past several months, and yet, in the stillness of this moment, Rachel could feel the shift inside her. The journey that had begun with heartbreak, confusion, and betrayal had led her here on the cusp of something new, something she had no words for. Her thoughts drifted back to the early days, when everything had seemed so certain. She had been in love, so sure that her future was already written. But as life often does, it threw curveballs her way. It was in the aftermath of the storm, though, that Rachel realized something profound. She had been broken, but she had not been destroyed. The emotional scars were still there, raw at times, but they no longer defined her. She had rediscovered herself in the most unexpected way through the quiet strength that had always been buried beneath her fears. Rachel's journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. The pain of rejection, the sting of abandonment, had taught her more about her own resilience than anything else. She had been forced to confront the reality that life doesn't always go according to plan. That the person you thought you could count on might not be there when you need them the most. But through that pain, she had found something even stronger, the realization that she could stand on her own, that her worth was not defined by someone else's love or approval. She was enough, just as she was. As her pregnancy progressed, so did her understanding of the strength she possessed. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone in her room, feeling the baby move inside her, Rachel had a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying a future. The future that she was going to build, not with Anthony, but with herself and the life growing inside her. She didn't know how she was going to do it, but she had come to understand that she didn't need all the answers right now. She would take each day as it came, one step at a time. The path she had walked to get to this point had been anything but easy, but it had led her to a place of unexpected peace. She no longer blamed herself for the decisions she had made. There was no use in looking back with regret. Every choice, every heartbreak, had shaped the person she had become, and she had learned to embrace that version of herself with compassion. Then, one afternoon, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, a familiar face appeared at her door. It had been months since their last conversation, but Rachel could still remember the kindness in Dee's eyes, the way she had shown up for her when she needed someone most. Dee had become more than just a friend. She had become a source of strength and understanding, a steady presence in the chaos of Rachel's life. "Hey," Dee greeted her with a warm smile, stepping into the apartment with ease. There was no need for pleasantries between them. Their bond had been forged in vulnerability, in the shared knowledge that sometimes life throws you a curveball, and you have to rely on those who are willing to catch it with you. "How are you doing?" Rachel smiled softly, the weight of the past few months still lingering, but no longer all-consuming. "I'm okay," she said, her voice steady. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "I'm learning to be okay." Dee sat down beside her, a gentle look of understanding on her face. "You've come a long way, you know," Rachel nodded, looking out the window at the city skyline. The world outside seemed so vast, so full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a place in it. "I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice soft. "I thought I'd be raising this baby with Anthony. I thought I had it all figured out. But now, I'm not sure what I thought I knew." "But you know something now," Dee said, her voice unwavering. "You know that you're capable. You've done this, Rachel. You've made it through. And now, you're going to build something incredible. You're going to build your family." Rachel's eyes met Dee's, and she felt a warmth in her chest. It wasn't just the baby, not just the potential future of motherhood, it was the realization that she wasn't alone anymore. She had friends, people who cared for her, who saw her for who she truly was. And that was worth more than she could have ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel's sense of hope grew stronger. She had been offered a new job, one that aligned with her skills, one that allowed her to use the very talents she had put aside in her years of uncertainty. It wasn't a perfect job, but it was a start, and it was hers. She had taken control of her future, and that felt empowering. As her due date approached, Rachel found herself in a place she never thought she would be, in a hospital room, surrounded by supportive friends, ready to welcome her baby into the world. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would not be easy, but Rachel had a newfound strength. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned and broken. She was a woman, a mother, ready to take on whatever came her way. When the baby arrived, a small, crying bundle of life, Rachel felt her heart swell with an overwhelming sense of love and purpose. She had done it. She had made it through the hardest period of her life and had come out the other side stronger than ever. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. She was now a mother, a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her family. In the months that followed, Rachel continued to rebuild. She balanced her work, her studies, and her new life as a mother. The struggles weren't over, but Rachel no longer felt alone in them. She had a community of family built not by blood, but by choice. And she had learned, through it all, that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the moments when you feel the most vulnerable. With each passing day, Rachel felt more at home in her life, more at peace with who she had become. She had rediscovered hope. She had rebuilt her future, one step at a time. And in the process, she had found the family she had always longed for, the family she was meant to have. Rachel's journey was one of profound transformation, a story not only of personal growth, but of rediscovery. At the start, she had been a young woman full of hopes, dreams, and aspirations. But life threw her a curveball, and she was left with a choice: crumble under the weight of her fears, or rise and face the unknown with resilience and courage. The path was anything but easy. It was filled with heartache, uncertainty, and, at times, loneliness, but through every setback, Rachel found the strength to move forward, even when the future seemed bleak and the road ahead appeared impossible to navigate. The most significant turning point in Rachel's life was when she realized that even though she couldn't change her circumstances, she had the power to control her response. Her relationship with Anthony had ended in betrayal, and at first, it felt like the end of everything she had known. The dreams they shared, the future they had planned, suddenly, all of it was gone. Yet, in that moment of overwhelming grief and fear, Rachel made a choice. She chose not to let this define her. Instead of allowing the weight of the situation to crush her spirit, she chose to rise. She chose to build a new life for herself and her unborn child. What followed was a series of small but significant steps. Rachel sought support from friends like Duh, who showed her the power of compassion and unconditional friendship. She allowed herself to feel vulnerable and to lean on others when needed. Through this vulnerability, she found strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She learned that true resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about how quickly you could rise after each fall. It was about pushing through the darkest moments, knowing that they would eventually pass. Rachel's journey wasn't just about personal survival. It was about rediscovering her sense of self-worth. She learned that no one else could determine her value, not her past relationships, not her circumstances, and certainly not the opinions of others. Her worth came from within, from the strength she cultivated through her struggles. Through this process, she began to build a life rooted in self-love and independence, recognizing that her happiness was her responsibility. As Rachel's pregnancy progressed, she found herself balancing the complexities of her situation. The physical changes she underwent were constant reminders of the new life she was creating, but they were also a reflection of the new life she was beginning to build. Every step she took, no matter how small, was a step toward a future that she could shape. This wasn't just about her child, it was about her. It was about reclaiming her dreams, her sense of direction, and her happiness. Her decision to take charge of her future led to an unexpected opportunity. Through her work at the restaurant, she discovered her passion for languages and business. This new opportunity was more than just a job. It was a new beginning, a chance to redefine her life. With each passing day, Rachel learned that while life could be unpredictable, there was always room for new possibilities. Every setback, every painful moment, was simply a step toward a new chapter in her life. But perhaps the most important lesson Rachel learned was the power of connection. She discovered that while life could feel isolating at times, she didn't have to face it alone. The relationships she formed with Duh, with her co-workers, and ultimately with her child became her anchors, grounding her in times of uncertainty. These connections reminded her that love, friendship, and support could provide the strength needed to face even the hardest of challenges. As Rachel's story comes to a close, we are reminded that our greatest strengths often emerge in the face of adversity. When everything feels like it's falling apart, that is when we have the opportunity to rebuild. The road to healing and transformation may not be easy, but it is always worth it. Rachel, we all have the capacity to rise from our struggles, to rediscover hope, and to rebuild our lives in ways we never thought possible. The deep lesson, the lesson Rachel's journey teaches us, is simple yet profound. Life's challenges don't define us. How we choose to face them does. In our darkest moments, it's easy to succumb to despair and feel that everything is lost. But if we allow ourselves to rise, to lean on the support of those around us, and to take small steps toward rebuilding our lives, we can find a way through. Resilience is not about avoiding pain or hardship, it's about embracing them and using them as the foundation for growth. No matter what happens, we always have the power to choose how we respond. How can we apply this lesson to our lives? In our own lives, We often face circumstances that challenge us, be it in relationships, career, or personal growth. Sometimes we may feel like we're at a crossroads, unsure of what the next step is. The lesson from Rachel's story is to remember that setbacks are not the end. Instead of dwelling on the obstacles, we can focus on the opportunity to rebuild, to learn, and to grow. Every struggle has the potential to teach us something valuable, and every painful moment can become the seed for a new beginning. When life feels overwhelming, take a step back. Reflect on what you've learned, what you can change, and how you can move forward. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. Surround yourself with people who support and encourage you. Just as Rachel found solace in the friendship of together, we can navigate even the most challenging moments and emerge stronger than before. Discussion question: what do you believe is the most important lesson we can learn from facing hardships and adversity in life? Do you think it's possible to turn a painful situation into an opportunity for growth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video helpful and inspiring, please consider subscribing to the channel and donating to support our work. Your contributions, no matter how small, help us continue creating valuable content that can make a difference. The time and effort we put into these videos come from a genuine desire to help others, and your support keeps us motivated to keep going. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we appreciate your ongoing support.